The word chef gets thrown around quite easily now. The difference between a chef and a cook is a cook knows how, but the chef knows why. Since I was 8 years old, I helped in the kitchen at home and cooked breakfast with my mother and my grandmother, and it just evolved. New Orleans is a food city, so it's just such a big part of everybody's lives. You would just as soon ask somebody, "What'd you eat last night?" as you said, "How's the weather?" Just like any place that you think is special, it's the people. Buildings and buildings are nice, historical and all, but it's the people. It's the joyful living they have down there. They're not in a real big rush, but I think the heat has a lot to do with that, slowing people down. But yeah, you take a little more time and enjoy life. I was a manager at Mother's Restaurant, one of the highest volume, best food restaurants in New Orleans, for about 5 years. And if it wasn't for Katrina, I would probably still be there. I just loved that job and loved the people. And, that was it, just living life in New Orleans, eating good, watching football, and cooking food. The hurricane hit on a Monday morning. Friday night, there was an exhibition football game with the Saints in the Superdome. There were 2 conventions of over 30,000 people in town, and I also believe it was the Southern Decadence Festival, so there was probably another 50,000 people right there. All visitors who aren't used to the hurricane season, who aren't used to evacuation. All the hotels had to be emptied, all the people had to be gotten out, and you didn't have much time to do it. That was Friday night, and it hit Monday morning. When you saw that eye of the storm on the television, you knew that this was a special storm. That thing was 30 miles across, and that's where the high pressure is, and the storms just come around it. But the better developed the eye, the stronger the storm. My wife and I had decided to stay in New Orleans, and my father and his girlfriend, they decided to stay as well. But we stayed in a hotel across the street from Mother's, and we just watched it roll in through downtown New Orleans. You could see that it just progressively got worse during the day, and then by 10 a.m. in the morning, you had 120 miles an hour winds, popping window panes out of 50-story buildings. It was pretty dangerous with all the glass flying around. Cars were actually blowing down the street in downtown New Orleans. They were actually being pushed into a corner. They wound up in the pyramid in the corner of the parking lot. And you were just in the building watching it. The misery was going on at the Superdome, and that was only 10 blocks away. I didn't know the catastrophe that was going on at the convention center. That was 4 blocks away. If it wasn't right in front of you, you pretty much didn't know what was going on, what was happening. Oh, that's the high ground. That's where the original city was. They knew what they were doing back then. You build on the high ground, and you allow for your environment. You don't try and build in a swamp and drain it and say, "Oh, it's dry land now." That's not how it works, obviously. No idea if you're going to walk back to a pile of wood and bricks, or you just don't know what's going on. Again, we don't know what's happening if it ain't happening in front of you. A lot of anxiety. Do I have a home? What's going to happen? What's going to happen with this? What's going to change with that? You knew there was going to be bad destruction. Just the wind that was in front of us and see what was happening. You knew the city was going to be in bad shape. What really did it, though, was when the levees break. After the storm passed, sun came out, people kind of said, "Oh, okay, town looks a little beat up, but we made it." But then a day and a half later or so, then the levees start breaking. That's when the real trouble started. So much more of a heartbreak is what happened to New Orleans was a man-made disaster, not a natural disaster. Mississippi got hit by Katrina. New Orleans got really high winds, but we made it through there. If the levees don't break, New Orleans is fine. But they were designed poorly and maintained poorly, and through lack of the people of New Orleans and the federal government, we were too busy eating and drinking, and they were doing whatever they do. And they fell by the wayside, and this is what happened. It was almost like being on an episode of Twilight Zone. You could stand on top of the Mississippi River Bridge and look out over a major American city, and not one thing is moving. Not one sound, no ships on the water, nothing. You knew you had a struggle coming up. You knew it was going to take a lot to get it back where it was, and in a lot of places, it'll never be back like it was. And one day you lose your grammar school, middle school, high school, your church you were baptized in, your doctor's records, anything that ever physically tied you to a place was gone in one day. And that's a lot. The deaths, everybody talks about the 1,800 people who died in New Orleans. But all the people they had to evacuate the hospitals, the stress that put on them in the 3 to 6 months after the storm, they started dying. And in the 6 to 12 months after the storm, the suicides down there, just incredible. I was going to 3 or 4 funerals a week for almost a year. But people I either knew, worked with, neighbors, whatever. Death was everywhere. It really was. It was a lot more than 1,800 people that storm killed. I was giving the food away because I knew if you don't get it out, you're going to have to clean it. So take it now, give it away. But that only lasted for about 2 days before the National Guard came and forced us out because of the rising floodwaters. But we were fine up in there. I had enough water, cigars, food, and tobacco to last me 6 months, so we'd have been okay.
How long did you guys stay down in New Orleans after the storm?
3 days. They kicked us out. I spent 1 day at my house. We went back to check it. Our house was fine. Well, it looked like it'd been through a storm, but it didn't have trout swimming in the living room. Drove my wife to her sister's house in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I probably slept for about 30 hours straight, and then I just drove right back, and I stayed back down there the whole time. I was down there for the next 2 years before we wound up moving here.
Okay, and those 2 years, what was that like?
It was, I don't know, it was some of the sites. I had to leave the restaurant business. There were no restaurants. There was nobody to cook. There was nobody to deliver the food. There was no restaurants. Right. So I started driving a truck for the oil companies, a hot shot truck, and we went from Mobile to Galveston, Texas, and all South Louisiana. So if an oil rig is sitting out in the Gulf of Mexico and a $300 million rig is not working because they need a $50 part, I would go get the part, get it to the helicopter, and we'd get it out there. The trick was, there was really no GPS and things at the time, and all the street signs and road markers were all gone. So unless you knew the area, you were just driving around the swamp in circles. So I did that for about a year. I put about 100,000 miles on my truck in 1 year, driving through South Louisiana. So I got to see so much of the devastation up close. What really brought it home to me, once I was in, made a delivery to Biloxi, Mississippi. And I went out to the beach, and I was just kind of walking along the beach. Nobody's there, and I was just walking around. I came across a tree. And in this tree, it looked like somebody emptied their closet and their dresser and all their clothes. The whole tree was just full of clothes. And I thought, that's when it hit me really hard, And that was somebody's life, It really was. 2 years, yeah, my wife said she didn't want to do another hurricane, and I said, okay, I can do that. I like 4 seasons. It's been great. We found a new church up here, and with her family, and just the way the people at Fort Wayne have opened their arms to us and supported us, it's more than I could hope for. I mean, it helps me spread my joy of cooking to some people who really needed some good cooking. No. And if you'd have told me 10 years ago I'd be mixing crab meat in a parking lot in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I'd have said, yeah, what? Huh? Okay, give me another drink,
Have you been back to New Orleans since you moved up here?
Twice. I still have family down there. My father and a couple of sisters are still down there, so I go on occasion, just not during the summer, that's for sure. To New Orleans, people ask me if I miss it. New Orleans I miss has really been gone a long time before Katrina. There used to be the neighborhood restaurants and stores, and you just went to the corner and you knew who had the little corner market and the corner ballroom, and each neighborhood had its own Mardi Gras parade, and it was just individual areas that people took pride in their own little neighborhoods. And now, it's the Starbucks and the McDonald's and all that. And that has crept in the American life there. But there's still little pockets of the city that still have that. But it was like that growing up. It was magical, New Orleans, when I was growing up. You had the pageantry of Mardi Gras was just incredible to grow up with. Music was everywhere, and not just for Mardi Gras, the Jazz Festival and things like that. I come from a family of musicians, so we had a lot going on at the house, too, between the cooking and the music. What do I want to know? First, I want to thank them all for all the help to all of America, that they helped us out a lot down there. And that's really just what I want to know. New Orleans is coming back, but only with their help.